nobody cares as much about our career as us. That is for sure. All of us, at different times, have found reasons to blame external factors for why things aren't going how we'd like them to go. And by the way, there may be external factors. Of course there are external factors affecting us. But at the end of the day, nobody else is going to fix it other than us.
Chris Hirst, a leadership advisor, an author, and a former global CEO, posted a question on LinkedIn not long ago that surprised me. He said, would you rather work for a bad human boss or a good AI boss? And 66% of people said they'd take the AI. That number is worth sitting with for a minute, not because of what it says about technology, but because of what it reveals about what people actually want from the humans that lead them. So Chris has worked with leaders at every level, and his observation right now is that everyone has an AI anecdote, but very few have a definitive answer for what they're actually doing about it. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, what drew me into this conversation in a major way was this idea that aptitude gets you in the door, but it's your attitude that gets you the job. And this idea that, to keep ahead, we just need more skills, more technical skills in the automated world. He's challenging that. He's saying, no, the opposite. Actually, it's your attitude, your mindset that is going to become the hallmark of what distinguishes the people who win and lose in the coming decades ahead.
Well, let's get into the conversation.
So I'd love to start, Chris, with just getting a sense, because you talk to so many people. You're out there working with leaders at all sorts of levels, from the most senior down to people at the beginning of their careers. Given the pace of change, given the complexity, the uncertainty, what's your kind of sense of what's happening right now?
My sense is I think people are finding it really difficult to distinguish the signal from the noise. I think it's very difficult. Everybody knows the change is coming, and it's probably going to be really big, and it might be really quick. But beyond that, nobody really knows, because nobody's a futurologist. And I think the problem with that is people are making either slightly knee-jerk short-term decisions, particularly around, let's say we were talking just before about graduate recruitment, for example, which is probably tougher than ever. People are pulling back on that, not because they don't think there's value there, but because they just don't know quite what the future holds, so are holding back. Also, I think people are diverting some of that money into investing for AI, which is the obvious tsunami that's coming. But at the same time, nobody knows what the future from a work point of view, and indeed in any other regard, is going to look like. So I think we're sort of in this sort of almost paralysis situation. Everybody you talk to gives you an anecdote about an AI related challenge or problem or threat. But very few people you talk to say, and this is definitively what we're doing about it. And I think that's a encapsulation of the challenge within business right now.
So you start your book opening it up with this idea that work is something we need to shape and own. So building on what you're saying with the separation of the signal and the noise, what is your meaning about that? How do we start to shape and own
our careers?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing is we have to accept that nobody cares as much about our career as us. I mean, that is for sure. And all of us at different times have found reasons to blame external factors for why things aren't going how we'd like them to go. And by the way, there may be external factors. Of course, there are external factors affecting us. But at the end of the day, nobody else is going to fix it other than us. And I believe that we just talked about what the future will hold. We can't predict that. But I would make a prediction to say that people will continue to be central to the functioning of businesses, and businesses will continue to hunt for the best people to come and work for them. I mean, it's obvious stuff, right? And therefore, if we're serious about our careers, we have to be clear-headed about what that means for us. Particularly, I'm talking about if you're ambitious about your career, if you just want to go to work at 9 and get away with as little as possible and go home at 5, fine. I'm not being judgmental about that, but those aren't the people I'm talking to. If you want to go and shape a career that suits and builds the kind of life that you want, you have to be clear about what employers want from you in order to do that. And I think that's also applies, the same principles apply if you choose to work for yourself, frankly, as well. I'd say one other thing which about the world of work, which is, I think there's a kind of social media driven fetishization, let's say, about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurialness, and that in some ways, you kind of cop out if you go and work for somebody else. That in some ways isn't it's impossible to have a rewarding and fulfilling career if you go and work for somebody else. And that really is bullshit. Do not buy that. Most of the most successful people have done both or one or the other. There's no path you can look at and say, oh, the most successful people have all followed this path. The most successful people all exhibit very similar traits, and those traits are relevant whether you work for somebody else or not. So my point is that whatever you end up doing, whether you start your own business or whether you go and work for somebody else, a career can be a very fulfilling thing in and of itself, if you do it right.
I think that's really interesting what you're saying there, because we are idolizing entrepreneurs and they're such a tiny proportion of people who work.
And it's really hard work.
Yeah.
It's bloody hard. Most businesses fail.
So when we think about, the advice that you would give to a young person starting off at work, about being themselves as much as anything else, but then translating that into something that they can take ownership of it. What advice would you give them in terms of their aptitude and their attitude towards what they're doing?
Well, I get shouted on social media for saying whatever you do, don't turn up and be yourself. And I suppose to qualify that point slightly, what I mean is you should turn up and endeavor to be, as often as you can, your best self. I think that's the point.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, I think this, again, you see it a lot on social media, this idea of authentic leadership. And I absolutely hate that phrase. What on earth? I mean, genuinely, what does it mean? And very often I see people, particularly senior leaders, use the description of themselves as being an authentic leader as an excuse for behaving badly, for being a dick, right? And nobody wants that, and nobody needs that. So I think what we need to be is a curated version of ourselves. We can't show up as somebody else. We can't do that, frankly, not over any sustained period of time. But we need to understand what the best version of ourselves means. It's like a kind of curated version of ourselves, I think. And so all of us in a professional context, I suppose, are a mix, as you say, of aptitude and attitude. So the core skills that we've developed through our degree or through experience in work, and then how we show up, the attitudes we bring to that. And in really simple terms, I think of it like this. I think that aptitude gets you in the room, whether that be for a promotion, whether that be to win a new client, whether that be to get a new job. But attitude gets you the job, gets you the promotion, because there's always going to be many, many people with equivalent skills to the ones you've got.
Okay, John. So I know we're just getting started in our conversation, but Chris just made a point that I think is worth reflecting on. He just mentioned that the term authentic leadership is something he doesn't care for because he's experienced many who've used it as an excuse for bad behavior. And I think he's right. I've seen that, and you've seen that. And I would build on that, which is to suggest that maybe that's not authenticity. What I mean by that is when people are behaving badly at work, whether they're leaders or not, if it's bullying or shouting or blame shifting or any number of destructive behaviors that feels authentic to them, I would suggest that that is stemming from low self-awareness and the behavior is actually not rooted in self-understanding. Therefore, it's not really authentic, but it's often a disguise. It's masking a deeper defensiveness or fear or some other more vulnerable emotion that the leader doesn't want to display. And so they compensate. They display something intense, or they power up in some way, or act out in some way that's destructive. And that's not really, I think, the intent behind the idea of authentic leadership, at least not from an emotional intelligence perspective. John, I'd be deeply curious to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with Chris in the sense that the word is used a lot. And it is used in the way that you're describing, which is to kind of justify defensively bad or ill-considered or low awareness behaviors. But it's also used as a kind of coercive type of thing to manipulate other people, using language to kind of suggest you're being authentic when you're being anything other than that. We think about what authenticity is really about. It's about creating trust between people, that you see something that's true in somebody and that, you can believe in it. So, I agree. I don't think we want to throw up authenticity out of the leadership mix, but we also need to call it out when it's anything but.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Let's get back into the conversation with Chris.
There's always going to be many, many businesses that can do the same thing functionally as yours. So how does a client, how does a boss, how does an employer choose? Well, they choose based on attitudes. They choose based on what it's like to be in a room with you when things are hard, whether the room warms up or cools down when you walk in, whether you're somebody who gets shit done. I mean, that for me is the central point. The people that we want working for us are people who we think are gonna make us better, right? And who are those people? Well, they're people that bring solutions, not problems. I mean, there's stuff we know. I mean, if you just asked somebody and said, don't think about career, don't think about work, just write down on a piece of paper, if you had to employ 3 people, how would they behave? Nearly everybody would write the same things.
But you've hired thousands of people. You've led, tens of thousands of people, and you must have promoted gazillions of people and fired some as well. But, and they're all smart people because you were in a high, knowledge business. Those smart people didn't always get the attitude right. What were the kind of ways in which they kidded themselves that they had the right mindset?
I think that's a great question. I think we all kid ourselves to an extent, right? But I also think that even very senior people, that really, what I consider to be and I'm sure anybody watching and listening will consider to be a glaringly obvious point. In reality, when it comes to it, many people don't think about themselves in a career context like that. People value. So I'll give you an example. Particularly people towards the start or mid of their career, when I was a relatively junior leader, let's say, and I perhaps did this myself, you would have conversations with people about the next step of their career, and people would frequently say, I want to be more involved in strategy. If I had a pound, dollar, whatever, for people who said that to me, I want to be more involved in strategy. And that's because people perceive strategy to be something that clever people do, and therefore clever people are who we all want to be because clever people get promoted, right? I'm like, no, I think strategy is pretty easy. I think it's important, but I don't think it's that difficult to do. I think what's difficult is going and executing it. Most companies don't need more strategy. Most companies need people prepared to go and execute the strategies they've got, because executing stuff is really difficult. It's difficult because it's hard work. It's difficult because it's exposing, because nobody gets fired over PowerPoints, but people might get fired when you go and execute something and it doesn't quite work out, or, I mean, not necessarily fired, but can be seen to fail, right? So I think in the context, being in work is stressful and political and all these things that we know. And I think these things can cloud our minds in terms of what are the things that our bosses or our clients want from us. I think people very often, and I've done this myself, You've known some of my bosses. I've done this myself when I look back, have a slightly passive aggressive relationship with our boss. But when we think about it, that's crazy, right? Because the most important person in our career at any given point is our boss. How do we add most value to our boss? Well, we help them achieve things they wouldn't if we weren't there. And by the way, that also applies to the people who work for us. That works in both directions. And so if we are thinking about how can we, through our behaviors, through how we show up, through how careful we are about our boss's time, through how clear we are about what their number one objective is and how we help them fulfill it, etc. How it's like to just be around us. How we say, I tell you what, why don't I take that? I'll go and do that. Yeah, people that say that to you, you laugh, right? And so if we think about that relationship with our boss, not only will they progress more quickly if we back ourselves to be good, which we all should, then we will progress more quickly too.
I love this conversation around the mindset of attitude and the mindset of showing up and being your best self. I want to come back to the curated piece a little bit. I'd like you to explain that a little bit further, only because what I don't think you're saying is some performative version of yourself that's completely inauthentic, where then it crumbles under the stress and pressure of daily life, right? So you're talking about tapping into something that's authentically you and bringing that forward so that it's seen as your best self, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, well, on one level, I agree with everything you've said, but to be clear, I think on some level, leadership is a performance.
Okay.
You are playing a role, and sometimes you have to behave in ways that you really don't feel like. Now, I don't think that's inauthentic. Because we do that in lots of situations, right?
Yeah.
I mean, lots of situations we say things that aren't necessarily, we tell white lies. I mean, we do it all through our lives. We understand instinctively how our body language and our verbal language and our written language matters. But I'll give you a really obvious everyday example. If you're in charge of a team, doesn't matter how big that team is, but, if I think back when I was a CEO, if I walked into the office and I made a big point of our leadership team, we would sit right in the middle of the business in an open plan office, and we would sit and be visible and next to each other. If you as the CEO walk into the office and sit with your head in your hands at your desk because you've just been fired by a client or you've had a row with your partner or whatever it is, however you feel, people really notice. People are looking at you to see how you are behaving. Your behavior sets the culture in the business. And I think it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to have bad days, because you do sometimes, but you have to be conscious of the fact that how you behave and how you show up really matters in terms of how other people feel. So getting angry. We all get angry sometimes. It's just all these emotions are human things. But you know what? You've really got to try not to. You've really got to not be emotionally incontinent if you're in charge. So rather than spikes like this, you may be, of course, some days are better than others. You can show emotion, but you can't be emotionally incontinent. You can't just have no filter and just behave however you feel like. And again, that sounds really obvious, but a lot of senior leaders are unable or unwilling to do that. And that makes them poor leaders.
You're distinguishing between emotional expression and how you feel.
Yes, sorry. That's why I mean it's a performance.
Yeah.
That's why I mean that what you show and how you behave really matters. And sometimes you might feel like going and sitting in the corner and sobbing, but I'm afraid it's a whole lot better if you don't. Maybe sometimes you just got to do that, but it's a whole lot better for the people around you if you don't, because leadership matters most when things are hard. When things are easy, it's easy. Anybody can do it. You're winning lots of clients and making lots of money. Everything's great. Anybody can do it, right? I mean, it's more, the harder and harder things are, the more and more difference in impact great leadership has. And so at those times, people aren't daft. The people around you and your team and your organization, they know things are tough as well. They'll know that things are difficult, or whatever it is, whatever the challenges are. There's a few secrets in organizations in reality. And what you need to do is, what people want is, they want to look at you and to feel like you've got a plan and that you know where we're going. And you've at least got a starting hypothesis for how to get there. You don't have to pretend to have all the answers, but sometimes you've got to stand up and say, all this stuff about leading from the back? Yeah, okay. But when stuff's hard, you've got to be at the front. You've got to say, I know where we're going. This is what we're going to do. Come on, let's go do it. And I'll be at the front. At least at the front in the sense of, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself.
Just coming back to the point you were making around being useful, backing yourself, figuring out how to make your boss successful, the people around you successful, and so on. We hear a lot of, for the last decade or so on, about younger generations having a sense of entitlement, which is kind of the opposite of what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
And, part of that may be, there's a culture around that on social media. That maybe part of that is, parents who've kind of indulged quite a lot and almost been coaches all through their life. In a good way. But, there are consequences of that. What are you seeing in terms of, like that trend?
I'm really wary of it.
Yeah.
Because I first of all don't feel like I've got, I'm very wary of making broad generalizations based on the relatively, of course, compared to all the Gen Zers there are in the world, a relatively small number that I've met.
Yeah.
And I'm also so conscious of every generation complains about the generation that comes after them. I mean, everyone, right? And Gen Z will complain about, millennials are complaining about Gen Z, and Gen Z, whoever's after that, Gen Alpha or whatever it is. And so I think there's slightly, and by the way, I do think, of course, there are generational changes, but I'm kind of wary about making generalizations like, therefore that means they're, I don't know, not going to work as hard or not as prepared to, do the things that maybe we once have done. But I will give you an example though. I was I won't name the company, but I was with a leadership group of a big manufacturing business, and they had some big challenges. And the people in the room, I was very moved by listening to the people in the room. They were deeply passionate about the business that they were involved in, and they were deeply passionate about the importance they felt that business had to the region that they were in. And they felt that in order to meet the challenges of that business, they were all going to have to start to work in a way, all of them, that they had never done before. They were going to have to, in their words, just frankly work harder than they ever had before with that business to succeed. And the people in that room said, and what we don't know until we try it is whether people will. We don't know. We're not saying they won't, but we just don't know if they will. And I don't think that's, I think that's a slightly different point, perhaps, but I found it in some ways, it was quite a moving and profound moment listening to them have that conversation. But I think that also one of the reasons I wrote the book, or my most recent book, is that I think there are many, many hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people around the world who do want to have successful careers and do want to have big dreams they want to fulfill and all those kind of things. And I think the rules, if you like, for how to achieve that haven't changed. And if you do understand those, then you increase your chances of succeeding. If you choose to not follow them, maybe there are other paths as well, but then you can't complain if people are prepared to work harder, to work perhaps with less ego, to invest in themselves, all the things we've talked about so far. you can't complain if you choose not to do those things, and the people that do are the ones that get the rewards. That seems fair and how it should be to me.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the economic realities that some of the younger people are experiencing. So you're talking about showing up with the right attitude, going the extra mile, all the things. And I was talking to some folks in their 20s recently who work really, really hard, but they're feeling unincentivized because they also have to have 2 roommates to pay their, to live local to their businesses. So in a world where the prosperity it doesn't follow as closely as it might have in our generations, right? What advice would you give to a listener who's like, listen, I have some purpose. I want to be successful, but it's not materializing for me. Is there anything from a mindset perspective or attitude perspective that you might share for a listener?
Well, I hesitate. I mean, I do have a point of view. I hesitate because of course, there are people in that position. I suppose I don't want to make it all about my book, but you've asked a question that leads directly to it. That, in a way, is why I wanted to write what I wrote, because I don't think working hard is enough. I actually think working hard is quite easy, if I'm really honest. Like I was saying to somebody today, being busy is easy. It's just getting paid for it that's hard. And so I'm not disparaging people that work hard. I'm not doing that. I'm saying that actually what we have to do is we have to make sure, I think about ROI on our time. That I think at the end of the day, all we have is time. Really, really successful people have no more hours in the day than anybody else. And nor do they necessarily work harder than everybody else. Sure, they work harder than some people, but as you say, there's plenty of people working really hard. What they do, and this is unarguably true, the question is how, what they do is they get a better return on the investment of each of those hours than everybody else, for them personally, as much as anything. It's obviously, presumably, in some cases, there's a correlation between the business they're in and themselves, but there's a better ROI. So we have to, which is why I want people to be clearer about how they are spending their time. So I'll give you an example. A lot of businesses, I'm sure you guys see this as well, a lot of businesses that I go and talk to still, we're in 2025 now. When you talk to senior execs, CEOs off the record, I'll do a keynote and everybody will ask the usual grown-up questions, and then you'll have a coffee afterwards. And on the coffee, people still talk about working patterns. People are still a bit leery about talking about it publicly, but privately, it's a real top 1, 2, 3 question for senior execs. And there's this real schism in organizations between leadership, frankly, would just be basically on average a lot happier if everybody was at their desk. And the employees on the whole are pretty happy with a more flexible way of working. And so there's this and it's a trust gap. And I think one of the challenges that happens with working from home, and by the way, I do think people are less productive working from home on average. I mean, I'm talking, of course, everybody can pick exceptions. And that's not because they're necessarily not working hard. It's because if you work remotely, you're more likely, in my opinion, to self-direct in terms of how you spend your time. So what the basic building block of an organization is a team, not an individual. All organizations are built of blocks of teams. And teams achieve things, teams are 1 + 1 = 3, a good team. And that's because that team is really good at directing the energy and focus of the individuals within it against its number one priority. The more dispersed that team is in geography and time, it's not impossible, but the more difficult it is to ensure you get that team alignment and to ensure that you aren't just a group of individuals. And I think that's one of the challenges with remote working, for example, which is it's harder to get that real alignment. And so people can sit at home all day long and feel like, well, I've been really busy today. I got up this morning, I decided what I was going to do, and I spent all day doing it. Yeah, but that's not the thing. And so I think that ensuring, you can apply that principle to yourself as well, which is nothing is guaranteed. There's not a silver bullet for the people that you've described. But I think the clearer you are about what it is you're trying to do and the things you need to develop to get there. Careers are a competitive event. Every step that you get promoted, somebody else doesn't. When earlier in your career, it's less obvious because there's big numbers. But pretty rapidly, it does become obvious. And so throughout your career, whether it be for pay rises, if you get a pay rise, somebody else doesn't. If you get a promotion, somebody else doesn't. So you have to work out how you're getting competitive advantage at those points of inflection.
So how do you get hired in the first place today?
Well, so I think that's a really interesting question, because I actually think that is changing pretty quickly how people hire. Do you mean like just as a graduate? Do you mean as an entry level?
John's looking for a job.
Yeah, because I think it's quite. I think there's two types of hiring, isn't there? There's first job and then the subsequent job, and I think they're different.
Yes.
Or I mean,
I'm thinking about getting your first job.
First job, okay. So first job, right? So I think that it's about understanding the process, first of all. So to really simplify, back to aptitude and attitude, there'll be there's a long list and a short list. So nobody gets hired from a CV. Nobody gets hired from a covering letter. Covering letters and CVs might, if you're lucky, we'll come back to that, but get you an interview. But it's attitude that gets you the job. So this is why this distinction between I need to get in the room, and then once I'm in the room, how do I make sure to convert it? Now, I think that there's a sort of a big curveball in this, which is the increasing use on both sides of that fence of AI. Increasingly, applicants are using AI to speed themselves through that, try and speed themselves through that process. And increasingly, employers are using AI to sniff out and it's this kind of arms race. I don't think there's a way around that, to be honest with you. I think to get an interview, you have to be good at making a case for why you are the right candidate. I mean, I can't break down in more specific than that, but it's also a numbers game, because there is an element of lottery about getting interviews. So unfortunately, you have to go through that process. I would say that I think that work experience on your application, CV, covering letter, is increasingly valuable, because as more and more and more people go to university, by the way, that's great. The problem for employers is it's harder and harder to differentiate based on qualifications, and qualifications are just a proxy. They're just a proxy for how good an employee you're going to be. They're not a very good proxy, but they're all an employer's got, basically, in simple terms. So work experience is increasingly valuable, I believe, because it tells them something work-related about you. And that's what they want. That's what so many people forget. What they want is somebody who's good at the job, not somebody who's good at university. Then I think when you get to interviews, I think interviews can be practiced and prepared for. The two P's of preparation and practice, by the way, I think you can improve a whole lot of what you achieve at work by better preparation and practicing it. But I think that people that do well in interviews prepare really properly for those interviews, and they understand the attitudinal points. And actually, I think you can practice interviews. I think you don't have to do it in an interview type situation, but what often people will do is they'll think, look on the internet, what are 5 typical interview questions that I might get asked? And you think, oh yeah, I can answer all of those. I don't know what that is. What do you want to do in 5 years? Or whatever they are. It doesn't matter. Ask ChatGPT. It'll give you a sensible list. Mm-hmm. But what's important is, under pressure, you need to be able to answer eloquently. And muscle memory really counts. It's like I play a lot of tennis. My forehand's great when it doesn't count, but when it's not so good when it does. And I think it's the same in interviews. So what you need to do is you need to write down those answers and practice those answers and keep doing them. And the more you do them, the better you'll be at them. But if you just think, oh yeah, those 5 questions, I'll be fine at those. And you get asked them and you think, oh, or you get asked them in a slightly different form.
It's great advice for showing up. I'm curious if you think there's changes that need to happen in how companies show up to the interview, how the recruiter shows up to the interview. Because obviously lots of bad hires happen every day, right?
So I think there are. I'm not sure that I think that because as we talked about, there's the sort of first job interviews and subsequent interviews. I don't feel well qualified to give employers advice on how to be better at hiring people for first jobs. Mm-hmm. It's not something that I personally have been involved for quite a long time. And also, I think, I think there is an element of, I just think that's quite a particular area of interviewing and recruitment. However, I do think for subsequent hires, once you're hiring people for their second job, their third job, right the way up to CEOs, I think one of the things that organizations forget, and I see it all the time. In fact, I think it's almost ubiquitous, is that what employers forget is that they need great people more than great people need them. And you see it all the time. I used to see it. I'd be like, so the people that work for me would say, oh, we think we've found this great person. They're absolutely incredible. Here's all the things they've done, and we've met them, and I love them and they love them. All we've got to do now is get them to go and meet these other 4 people. Like, what? I mean, why are you doing that? Meeting more people doesn't necessarily improve your chances of finding the right person. It might reduce it. That's exactly what I think. And so when it comes to great people, you are selling as much as you're buying. And I think a lot of employers, now that they, the bigger they become, the more process they put in, the more they incline to do that, because you have people whose job it is to run a process for recruitment. The process becomes the end in itself, rather than trying to find fantastic people. So I would always say, we need to be, don't hire the wrong person, but if you fire, and so the process needs to be as long as it needs to be to find somebody who you're really excited by. But once you've found somebody really excited by, offer them the job. Because the recruitment process, whether it be at a graduate level or at any stage, is very imperfect. I would think that out of every 3 people that I hired, if 1 exceeded my expectations, 1 met my expectations, and 1 didn't meet my expectations, if I achieved that, I was doing quite well. Because it's just an imperfect process. And so that to me is another reason not to stretch it out indefinitely, because there's an opportunity cost for your business as well as stretching it out. Presumably you're hiring somebody because there's a pressing need in your business, and if it takes you 9 months to find a person, that's a real problem, right?
So you get the job, you join a team, and as you said, the team is the most fundamental unit of economic activity. But being in a team isn't as straightforward as it used to be, because you might be in 3 teams or 4 teams. You're in and out, and people are leaving. This forming, norming, storming thing doesn't have a chance to succeed. Yep. What advice have you got about being a great member of a team?
A great member of a team. Again, I think it's a great question, and I think the answer is common sense. But it's common sense that people don't think about. And what I would encourage everybody to do is to write down, as I said earlier, what would your ideal colleague be? How would your ideal colleague behave? Maybe write it down under a couple of different circumstances. I'm having a really crappy, awful day. On a crappy, awful day, what would my ideal colleague be like? Right? And so maybe we could just get some pieces of paper out and do this now.
Let's do this now.
Yeah.
All right. Where's the pen?
One of those games where you fold over a piece and pass it around.
Yeah.
And the answer, of course, is obvious. Be that person.
Yeah.
And so and I guarantee that most people, if you ask 10 people that question, you'd get 80% alignment, if not more, amongst those 10 people. And some of those would be things like, I want to work with somebody who's good at their job, right? Working with somebody who's not good at their job is a pain in the arse. So I want to work with somebody who's good at their job, but I want to work with somebody who maybe helps me be better at my job. I want to work with somebody who, if I'm having a really bad day, they maybe come up to me and say, shall I get you a cup of tea? Or shall I get you a coffee? You look like you're having a really shit day. Are you okay? I want to work with somebody like that. I want to work with somebody who looks at me and helps me and takes work off me. I mean, if I'm struggling and drowning in work, takes work off me, doesn't dump work on me. I want to work with people who are respectful of my time. I want to work with people who turn up on time. I want to work with people who, if they say they're going to do a thing, they do that thing. And if they are, for whatever reason, unable to do it, they're too busy, they don't know how, whatever, they're straightforward and they're honest with me. I want to work with people I trust and who are honest. These are the people we want to work with.
Yeah.
And we all want to work with those people. So just be that person. And actually, because I wouldn't say that, I mean, of course, there are plenty of people that behave like that, but I think that people often don't consciously behave like that. People don't think back to the curated version of me. How do I, as frequently as possible, show up as that person? That's what, I think a great team, and even just the question you asked, how do I show up as a great team member, is a really important question for people to ask themselves at all levels, because you're a member of a team throughout your career, right the way through, and member of multiple teams throughout your career. How do I, and I would say the first thing that I would put on that list is I would look out for my teammates. I would look out for my teammates no matter what. I've got their back. And I think there's nobody that wouldn't love working with that person. And if people love working with you, you're always going to get asked back.
Yeah. Is there something that organizations are getting wrong in supporting that as well? Because I've had the luxury of working and the privilege and the honor of working with team members that you've just described.
Yeah, me too.
And I try to be that way.
Yeah.
But when people's performance gets measured at the end of the year, it's all individual. Like there's I don't know of really any examples where the team is getting evaluated about how they did all those things, right? To make sure that everybody thrives and the team thrives. It's sort of like put teams together, but then your scorecard's all about you individually. Well,
I think they are individual behaviors, aren't they? I don't think that is inherently wrong. I mean, when you're looking at the team is comprised of individuals. I always joke, there's lots of I's in team in reality, because we're all individuals, and in a great team, I think there is a alignment between the team fulfilling its objectives, whatever those might be, and me feeling that as the team does that, I move closer to fulfilling my own as well. That to me is the perfect environment for us to want to work in. And I think it is useful to look at to give, because we are all individuals, to look at how individuals do. I've got a slightly different moan about the situation you described, which I actually think that most formal annual performance review processes are essentially a total waste of time, because they are incredibly bureaucratic. They're often done for organizational box ticking or even arse covering reasons. They take up huge amounts of time for, if you run a team of 10 people, which isn't a huge team, and you have to do an organized, fill in multiple blah, blah, blahs performance review for 10 people, that is a lot of work. And I'm not arguing against, I'm not saying that that way of doing it is wrong per se, but I am saying that very often the way that is executed is an end in it. It's sort of another of these things that becomes an end in itself rather than a means to an end. And that book, you both know it, but that book, The 1 Minute Manager, which basically just says, in short terms, just talk to people regularly about how they're doing, right? Yeah. That was great. That wasn't, do this, don't do that. is a far more practical and useful way, I think, to develop people's skills. Now, one of the reasons organizations put these big things in place is because many managers don't do that. And because they don't do that, the organization thinks to itself, well, we have to have some way of giving people an opportunity to get feedback, and indeed to give us feedback. But I think that very often the complexity of the way those things are done is just so self-defeating, because everybody by the time you get to it, everybody's just exhausted. They just want to finish it. I've done this, and now, of course, that's in a world where everybody's busy, isn't great.
Yeah.
So it's very human to bitch, moan, carp, complain.
Yep.
I love your piece in the book around the ROI of complaining. Yeah. Can you talk to us about that?
I saw this thing the other day and said, if, don't complain, don't blame other people, and don't make excuses. I love that. I think if you can go through your life and think, because it's a sort of thing I was talking about at the start, only looked through the other end of the telescope in a way, in the sense that nobody cares about your career as much as you. Nobody's going to contribute to it more than you do, obviously. But complaining, making excuses, blaming other people are very human things to do, but they just get you nowhere. You spend your time complaining or blaming people or finding excuses. Sure, you can do that, but it's not only does it not move you forward, I actually think it moves you backwards, because it moves the focus away from where it needs to be in your own head, which is you. Because the reality of it is that for all of us, personally, professionally, whether we are thinking about ourselves, whether we're thinking about the team we run, whether we're thinking about the organization we run, the majority of factors that influence outcomes are outside our control. The vast majority, right? We can't, everything from the weather to the economy to what our competitors do, the list is almost endless of things that are outside of our control. And I suppose we could be intimidated by that. But on the flip side, we could say, well, actually, what we have to do is identify the things that are in our control. And that, I think, is very liberating. It doesn't mean we ignore external factors, but what we have to do is focus on what we can control. And of course, when it comes to us, we have a vast amount of control over, we can choose to, we can behave. We have full control over our own behaviors. It's not easy, and nothing is easy, but we do. And so the more that we are able to understand what the positive and useful behaviors are that will get us towards our goal, perhaps that, if we can just make a 5 or 10% change on that, it'll make a big difference, because most people don't.
I love the idea that ROI, it's a nice way of co-opting, stoic philosophy into business language. And, I was just watching some of the teams that you work with in the past. The ROI of complaining was not really understood. But
it's true everywhere.
Well, right? Absolutely, because very smart people can confuse and discussing and describing they don't control with some sort of critique that's useful. But what you're saying is that it really doesn't give you any value whatsoever.
I think that you will meet people, we've all met people who consider it as a sign of intelligence to be very, very good at telling you all the things that aren't right, that describing problems. And let me tell you, it's super easy. Anybody can spot problems. Anybody can look at an idea and tell you what's wrong with it. Anybody can walk into a business and tell you what the problems are. It's almost trivially easy. What is the opposite of trivially easy is fixing them. And if I had to summarize the difference between the people that I want on my team and the people I don't, I want people on my team that are willing. And I use willing more than able, frankly, are willing to give it a go, to go and fix the stuff that needs fixing. Because finding the stuff that needs fixing it's obvious.
Yeah.
And yet you'll sit in team with very senior people, and the whole big project's about identifying what the problems are. Well, I know what the problems are. In fact, I also know here's 10 ways we might theoretically go and fix them. Okay, I know that too. But, everything we want is on the other side of some difficult shit we don't want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what leadership's about. That's why it's hard. It's not hard because it's intellectually hard. It's hard because you've got to do stuff that really difficult. I mean, I was talking to a senior leader yesterday, founder of a business. And he explained all the challenges his business had, and the challenges are familiar challenges to anybody who runs a business. And I said, I'd love to come and work with you, but I'm telling you now, you already know what the answers are. It's just, they're really difficult to do. What I can probably help you do is enable you and give you some of the skills and the backgrounds and the emotional support even to go and do those things. But I'm telling you now, you probably know what they are, and you're not doing them because they're really hard.
Mm. Can you give us a taste of your Bluffer's Guide to Networking?
So I deliberately called it Bluffer's Guide because I really never saw myself as a particularly good or enthusiastic networker. But I think the reality of it is that networking is a really useful and important skill for our careers at all levels. I think it's for me, it's like probably one of the two big work phobias. The other one being the sort of universal work phobias. The other one standing and speaking in front of people, right? What is that thing about most people would more scared of speaking in front of other people than dying or something like that, right? Well, I think that networking, walking into that room full of people you don't know is right up there with it. I think if I had to summarize it, it's not that different to my two P's again, my two P's of interviewing: preparation and practice. I think I imagine it a bit like arachnophobia. Okay, the way because it kind of is a phobia. It's a sort of an irrational phobia, isn't it? You walk in the room and you think, oh, well, I don't know anybody here. Why would anybody want to talk to me? All those things in your head. I feel a bit shy. What if I make a fool of myself? All that stuff that we've all been there with. And the reality of it is many other people in the room are all feeling the same. And I see it as a bit like arachnophobia. The way they cure you of arachnophobia, isn't it? Is they basically, in simple terms, put progressively bigger spiders on the back of your hand. Yeah. Okay, so it's progressive exposure. So they put a money spider on, then a slowly bigger one, and then you end up full tarantula, basically, right? And I think, in really simple terms, you're never going to overcome your phobia of networking, because I don't think it's about being good at it. I don't think it's just going and talking to people, and everybody can talk to people. It's overcoming that phobia of talking to strangers, initiating conversations, worrying that you're going to run out of things to say, worrying that, I don't know, people are going to walk away from you because you're too boring or something like that. But you're only going to get better at it ultimately by exposing yourself to it. So I would, and this is what I did essentially, is think, right, unless I actually start to put myself in those situations, it's like, of course, I'm never going to get better at it, nor am I going to build a better network. I mean, so I have to find a way of putting myself in those situations. So I'm going to go, at least initially, with a plan. I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to one person. And then next time I'm going to talk to two people. And next time I'm going to talk to three people. And before I would go, I would write do my research. Maybe if I can find it in advance who's going to be there, you can research some of the people, or I can research, if there's a speaker, I can research something about them, but I can prepare some things I go and talk to people about. Just like basic, doesn't matter. Again, these days it's easier than ever. Hi, ChatGPT, I'm going to a networking event on blah, blah, blah. Give me 10 questions. But it's preparation. So you have something in your back pocket, go and stand and talk to people, and progressive exposure works. And also, of course, what then happens is, because all industries are like little villages, really, aren't they? And of course, what happens in time is, if you do go to more networking events, you start to see people you saw at previous ones. And then once you're speaking to 3 people and 4 people, it gets a bit easier, because suddenly it isn't just a room of faces you don't recognize. You do start to recognize some faces. But I think it's preparation and practice and progressive exposure.
Mm-hmm. So as you were writing Indispensable, I'm just wondering whether you had flashbacks to your former self, in kind of like a bit of a kind of autobiographical.
Yeah, everything's autobiographical.
Yeah.
I worked with a creative director once who said everything's autobiographical, and as soon as he put that thought in my mind, I see it everywhere now.
Well, I was reading it from that perspective, thinking, I wonder what. Yeah. So, what if you were looking at that and thinking about the advice you would give your 21-year-old self? What might you have loved to have been able to do there?
I think enjoy it more along the way. I certainly was. I am, but certainly when I was younger, was a very, very ambitious person, and let's be honest, nobody gets big jobs by accident. I mean, you see the shite that people talk about. I mean, nobody gets to be CEO of anything by luck. But they may get there by luck, but they may be okay. They may be lucky to get it. That's different to getting it by accident. Okay, so you have to sacrifice a lot along the way. You have to work very hard. You definitely need some luck. All these things along the way, and to an extent, you have to be very ambitious to get there. And I was that person. And I think what that meant for me, and I suspect I don't think this makes me that unusual. That means that I don't think I lived in the moment as much as I could have done. I think I could have enjoyed the journey more, as well as enjoying or at least striving for the destination, the next step, if you see what I mean. So I think I would, in fact, an old boss of mine once said, I think you just need to smell the flowers a bit more along the way, Chris. And I was like, yeah, fine, whatever. Because I knew best.
Are you doing that
But I
now?
would listen to that advice.
Are you doing that now? What are you doing to enjoy the journey that you're in at the moment?
It doesn't come easy to me. I'm not a natural enjoyer of journeys. I'm still very ambitious, but I am definitely doing it more than I was, and consciously doing it more than I was. Yes.
Good.
When you think about AI, I know this is a subject that we're all getting a bit, kind of tired of as well.
Yeah. Already.
Already.
Before it's even here, really.
Well, it's because it's so much,
Yeah.
Noise and, that kind of vertiginous feeling of excitement and, fear and stuff that it generates in lots of people. What are you thinking about AI?
So I did this is tangentially related, but I'll share it with you. I did a poll I posted a poll on LinkedIn a little while ago. And I said, would you rather work for a bad human boss or a good AI boss? And 66% of people said they'd rather work for a good AI boss than a bad human boss. Now, on one level, that's surprising, but on another level, it's an interesting insight into what bosses are there for us. For us, what does our boss do for us? Well, a good boss, for me, means that I quite enjoy my job, and you were talking about people working harder and harder and not getting rewarded. I want a boss to help me get a return on the investment that I'm putting in. So if that boss is AI and lets me get a return and gets promoted and get to where I want to get to, then yeah, I'd prefer they were human and I could go for a pint with them after work. But if they're helping me move forward, I'd rather that than some human boss who wasn't. Exaggerating. But anyway, it's an interesting insight. It's more about, I think, and it's more about understanding what people really want from a boss, actually, than whether AI or not. I think that I feel about AI, like Niels Bohr said, prediction is notoriously difficult, particularly when it comes to the future. And I think that applies to AI. I can't predict how it's going to change the way we work. I'm not going to attempt to. I think I think that workplaces are still going to be full of people for the rest of my life. I think those people are going to be doing very different things as a consequence of technological development, of which AI is going to be one of them. However, I think the skills that determine whether and how we progress, which is attitude based rather than aptitude based, are still going to apply. So those things are absolutely still relevant. But in terms of what we're doing, I don't know. I think it's for sure that AI is going to sweep away some industries entirely, in the same way that every technological innovation has. And those that it doesn't sweep away, it's going to change in dramatic ways aspects of, even if the fundamental, I don't know, the car industry, somebody's still making cars, but I've just picked that out of the blue. But AI is clearly going to make a huge impact on manufacturing industries in all sorts of ways, and every other one. But I feel unqualified to answer it better than that, really. What I think is a more tricky and more immediate question is, if you're running a business today, what do you do? By the way, I don't have a super eloquent answer to this. Maybe you do, but if you're pretty well any business, if you're running a business today, AI is coming, a lot of your employees are using ChatGPT. And by the way, if they're not, what are they doing? I mean, they should be, in a way. Whether they're using it well or badly is a separate point. But that's not really using AI, right? So how do you think about, as a leader of a business, how you implement an AI in a strategic way in your business to gain competitive advantage? Because that's what we should be doing as leaders. It's not just doing it for the sake of it. It's, I want to gain competitive advantage. And how do I use AI to do that? It has to be this is a sweeping statement, but it has to be a top 3 question, if not the number 1 question that you should be trying to answer, I think, as a leader of a business right now. And I think that the challenge is, the answer to that is, it's very difficult to know the answer to that question. So therefore, I think that what you need to be doing is ensuring that, because you can't see the full picture, and you can't, because it's the future, don't use that as an excuse to do nothing. I think you have to find a way to be able to be doing some things, that building the plane in the air thing. You can't just ignore the core of your business, whatever that might be, but you have to find ways to be working out through actually doing, not just working out on pieces of paper, how AI might strategically shift as opposed to tactically, like give everybody access to ChatGPT. How you can strategically shift your business. And you should be putting quite a bit of time and effort into that, I think. But don't just talk about it a lot and do nothing. Because that must be there's a lot of businesses doing that, talking about it a lot and not actually doing very much.
What else should we be talking about in terms of the things that you are constantly hearing from the people you're working with that you think would be valuable to share?
Well, I mean, a favourite topic of mine, and I know one that we've talked about in the past about, is culture, actually. Because a lot of the things that we've talked about in this conversation are related to culture. And I almost wish we had a different word for it, because it's a word that, like, people were, oh God, they're going to talk about culture now, I'm going to go and watch telly. I mean, it's become this, it's a bullshit word. And yet, if you have a group of people to, like, putting aside AI and all this other stuff we've talked about, if you have a group of people of any size together trying to achieve a shared task, that group will have a culture. It just will. And now it might have a conscious culture, as in it has formed that culture deliberately. It might have an accidental culture that has just arisen from how they interact. That group might be aware of it, or it might not be. All those things are true, but it will be there. And And, I talk to people at all sorts of levels in organizations, and I always talk about culture in some level. And I almost do it slightly apologetically, as I have now, because I think you get so much kind of eye rolling and it's seen as, oh, yeah, we worry about culture. Yeah, we go and talk to the HR director.
How would you define culture?
I think culture is the environment a leader creates in order for their team to outperform.
Okay.
Culture is about creating competitive advantage within a team.
Is it a way of feeling or a way of thinking?
It's a way of behaving.
Way of behaving.
It's all about behaviors.
Okay.
And it's essentially the behavior of the leader. And so when I talk to senior leaders, not necessarily CEOs, but senior leaders, people accept that culture is there. But even very senior people, they behave as though it's this thing that's somehow bigger than them. You can't easily see it. And people are told it takes forever to change. And it's really hard to change. So they just see it as this thing that's bigger than them. And they go, oh, you know what? I'm just going to focus on the real business stuff. Like, show me the P&L. And yet the reality of it is, if you run a team of people, culture isn't bigger than you. It is literally you. And so if you want, the reason cultures don't change is because people don't want to change their behaviors. That's exactly what it is. And so it's easier to go and pay McKinsey $3 million to go and do a year-long culture thing that you can write about in the annual report and you can put on the website and you can send everybody an email about it. You say, yeah, we've talked about the culture. Now let's move on. It's easier to do that than actually have a conversation about the behaviors you're exhibiting as a leader in a leadership team. And that applies I think what's really important to everybody listening to this is that applies right the way down through an organization. So virtually every leader has a boss. Virtually everyone. You're a leader if you've got people that work for you. And the chances are, the number of people that don't have a boss is vanishingly small in the greater scheme of things. And so therefore, what that means is, in an organization of any size, there isn't a homogenous culture. There isn't one single culture that spans the whole organization. It's actually a patchwork of cultures because each team has a different leader. And that's why you can go into an organization and people can have completely different experiences of that organization depending on where they're working. And they're having different experiences because there's a different culture, and there's a different culture because there's a different leader in that team. And so when I hear people talk to me about culture and complain about culture, I say, well, what's the culture like in your team? Well, hang on. What can you control? You can't control, like we said before, most of the stuff's out of your control. But I tell you what you can control. You can control the culture in your team because the culture in your team is your behaviors. So why don't you sit down with your team and talk about what culture you'd like to have? How would people like, and just say, how would people like to work? I mean, that's what you need to do. And what people want is they want trust, they want autonomy, they want support, they want great communication. I mean, these are universals. I think there's basically, broadly speaking, one way to create a great culture and thousands of ways to create broken cultures. I'm not saying that all great cultures are exactly the same, but I am saying that all great cultures have an awful lot in common. And if you just did the four things that I've talked about, we're going to have a high trust, autonomous, supportive group that communicates effectively with each other. I mean, most teams, that would be a pretty significant improvement straight away. And then so you sit down and you have a conversation with each other about, okay, practically what does that mean? And just the act of having that conversation with your team would improve the culture because most people don't.
Where we kind of, with our show and your agenda is kind of like meeting the idea that attitude will become the source of competitive advantage in the new economy that's forming. It's always been a big differentiator, but it's become increasingly more important. Can we talk, have you got some kind of attitude hacks that, we can kind of, close the show on, things that help you to reset your attitude when you've had a terrible day or when you've had a setback or a difficult conversation? What does Chris Hirst do to reset his attitude?
Well, I can tell you one of the things that I would think about when I went into a new job. No, not necessarily a new job, but let's take that because that's a good inflection point, isn't it? I would think about what I came to call my first five. And I call it 5 because it alliterates with first. So it doesn't have to be 5 people for that. Okay. But anyway, but that for me, that's having a group of people around me and it's not quite the same as a team. And it's an idea that I sort of stole from a woman I met who was a head teacher at a school, and she kind of made her career being one of these amazing people that go into fix broken schools. And she wasn't the boss; she was just part of the head teacher's team. And I said, well, how do you even begin fixing a school? I can't imagine this. And she said, well, what we do is we find a group of people. She didn't call it first 5. We go in with a team of people, and those people exhibit these behaviors. They're all good practitioners. So as we were saying before, they're good at their jobs. They lead by doing. So they actually do. They get in the classrooms and they create the change by demonstrating how they want it done. We trust each other. We all fundamentally buy in, not just to what we're trying to achieve. I mean, that's easy to buy into. We want to make this school better, but we all buy into how we're going to go about doing it. And we all can feel vulnerable with each other. And I love this as an idea. And in a way, like, it's what Premiership football managers do. Okay. No, these days, no Premiership football manager or any, know, I'm sure it's the same with those types of sports teams as well, but nobody goes in on their own. They haven't got time. They haven't got time to get in. They want to think, right, well, what I've got to do is I've got to go and find 5 coaches for this and 5 for then I've got to do a strategy, and they've got about 2 months before they get fired. So they go in with a preset group who know exactly what they're going to go and try and do, who trust each other, who can finish each other's sentences, who they can essentially, it's like an ink dot strategy, in the sense, you put ink dots on a piece of blotting paper and in time they spread out and meet. So they can each separate, but be kind of not quite clones of each other, but they all trust each other to be doing the same thing in the same sort of ways and using the same sort of language. Hive mind, exactly. But you can only do that through knowing those people in advance to an extent. And so for me, when things were tough, and I tried to make sure that I had people around me who helped me through those things as well, because leadership is very lonely and it is very difficult. And it's easy, as we have here, to get tied up into all sorts of proper management speak about cultures and behaviors and all these kind of things. But actually we need people who can support us and help us through when stuff is tough and hard. And sometimes, we all reset in different ways. But what I wanted is I wanted people I could go, I've had a really shit day. Can we go for a pint? That for me that's just great. And people that you can just sit and then you can get off your chest or not get off your chest, doesn't matter. But you can just go but it's people that you feel are going through it with you. It's not just we all need friends and people outside work. But it's that sense of people that are going through it with you. So you are experiencing the same things and feeling the same things and have the same level of emotional investment in those things. That somehow that's a different sort of relationship and an important relationship to all those others that we have in our lives. And I think of us as all a bit like those counters in Trivial Pursuit, in Trivial Pursuit you have the what if you like the thing, the 6, and there's the 6 segments. And to win at Trivial Pursuit, you've got to put a cheese in each segment, right? But they've all got to be different colors. And I think that's a bit what our lives are like. We have different segments of our life. And to be, to be fulfilled and happy, we have to look after all of those segments, and they are quite discrete to an extent. And it's okay. And it's okay to say, I have great, deep, emotional and meaningful relationships in my workplace. And that's increasingly unfashionable to say that. We're told we have to have a transactional relationship with work. And I'm saying you can do that if you like, but it's going to be unpleasant and hard work if you do. It's great to have deep, meaningful relationships with the people you work with.
That's a great place to land it, I think. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the Mindset Economy. This was a brilliant conversation. So much to take away for us, for me, for our listeners. So really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Chris makes a distinction in this conversation that I think a lot of people need to hear, especially if they're working hard and not seeing it translate into actual progress. Being busy, as he says, is easy. Getting a return on that time, that's the hard part. And the people who progress aren't necessarily working more hours than everyone else. They're getting a better return on each one of those hours.
Yeah, and I think Chris makes an uncomfortable but true point that careers are a competitive event. You are competing against other people for progress economically. And sometimes we forget that. We project our ambitions back onto the organization or onto various situations and forget that we have to take accountability for our progress. And that means starting with the delusions that may be standing in the way of those and eradicating them so that we can align our mindset with the things that we want out of life.
Absolutely. Well, I know we both always love talking with Chris, and I trust everyone has enjoyed this conversation. And be sure to join us next time as we explore the mindset economy.